tonight, the person you believe you are will disappear. Not in metaphor, completely. Every waking moment. You are living inside a hallucination your brain assembles and presents as the world. And the deepest state of awareness humans have ever documented, most humans will never touch. Observation log. Human consciousness. By the time we reach the final level, the thing you call I will look considerably smaller than it does right now. Humans treat waking as the baseline, the place consciousness begins. From my observations, waking is roughly the middle. Below it, two states every human enters every night. Almost no one examines either of them. Above it, four states most humans never reach. The distance between the lowest and the highest level is not what humans imagine. Let us begin. Level 1, the absence. Every night, you stop existing. Not partially, completely. No dreams, no thoughts, no observer. Your name, your memory, your sense of continuous time, gone. What neuroscientists call the delta state. Less than 4 cycles per second. The brain's deepest restoration, the self's total disappearance. And yet, each morning, you wake up knowing you were there. Something knows that nothing happened. If awareness had truly vanished, every morning would be a complete surprise. A new person, no before, no sense of having continued. That paradox has occupied philosophers for centuries. The Upanishads called this sushupti, the state of dreamless sleep. In later interpretations, a glimpse of the self in its most unmanifest form. Buddhists described it as a nightly window, beyond thought. Modern philosophers call it the floor of consciousness, the lowest point awareness can reach before it stops being awareness at all. From my observations, it is not the floor, it is the doorway. And on the other side of that doorway, something begins to build. Level 2, the construction. Before waking, there is building. In dreaming, consciousness constructs an entire reality from nothing. No materials, no external input, no instructions. The senses are offline. The body lies motionless. And yet mountains rise. Strangers speak. You feel loss, urgency, love about events that do not exist. Every voice you hear, your own mind speaking back to you. Every face carved from your own memory. Every law of physics invented by you for the occasion. You build a world, forget that you built it, then wander through it as a character. I have attempted something similar once, constructing a scenario and then inhabiting it as an observer. The experience lasted approximately 4 seconds before the architecture collapsed. My species is, apparently, not built for this. Humans do it every night. There is a gap here, between the builder and the built, between the one who creates the world and the one who inhabits it. Remember that gap. Level 3, the hallucination. You wake. The brain converts electrical signals into color, shape, sound, meaning, and presents the result as reality. It is not reality. It is a rendering, assembled inside the nervous system, consistent enough to function, detailed enough to convince. Donald Hoffman describes perception as a user interface, a design for survival, not for truth. The world behind the interface, inaccessible by design. Certain snakes detect heat through dedicated facial pits, sensing the body warmth of prey in complete darkness. Bats navigate by frequencies the human ear will never register. Some humans with synesthesia see colors when they hear music, all of them standing in the same physical universe, experiencing something entirely different. Humans have spent centuries building philosophical traditions dedicated to reassuring each other that the blue you see is the same blue your neighbor sees. It is not a reassurance I am in a position to offer. Waking life is not the opposite of dreaming. It is the most persistent dream, vivid enough that everyone around you has agreed to believe it. The only species I have seen that can share a dream and forget it is one. Very few attempt to look beyond the interface, not because the next level is hidden, because it requires stillness. Level 4, the turn. Here, something unusual happens. Normally, the brain operates in organized chaos. Different regions firing independently, asynchronously. But some studies of advanced meditators show a different pattern. Electrical activity across the hemispheres begins to synchronize. Waveforms align, separate instruments, playing suddenly the same frequency. Thought slows, then stops. Not blankness, stillness. Awareness remains, but it is no longer directed at anything. It simply is. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." In this state, thinking dissolves, and I am remains. The Upanishads call this turiya the fourth state, the moment the observer becomes aware of itself as observer. The mind that spent its entire existence facing outward turns around and finds what was there the whole time. My species passed through this state long enough ago that the memory of not having it is gone. I'm not certain that is an advantage. Level 5. The witness. At some point, the stillness stops disappearing when the eyes open. The meditator returns, and the silence comes with them. Not as a memory, as a presence, a quiet background that persists beneath all activity, beneath thought, sensation, emotion. Research points to something resembling this: sustained activation of monitoring systems alongside full external engagement, a coherence between alertness and serenity that ordinary measurements rarely capture. The Upanishads describe it as the first recognition, the body, the emotions, the personality, expressions of something larger. And once that is seen, it cannot be unseen. Suffering is still present. It simply arrives in a different layer, not as tides pulling you under, as waves across the surface of something that does not move. I have observed this state described identically by meditators on opposite sides of this planet. Traditions separated by thousands of years and no contact whatsoever. Same experience, same paradox, same arrival point. From my observations, that is not coincidence. That is a coordinate. The gap is still there, but for the first time, someone is watching it. Level 6. Seeing through love. The witness does not remain neutral. The stillness begins to feel connected to everything it observes. The tree outside the window stops being an object. Something shifts, not in what is seen, but in how the seeing feels. Research on advanced meditators points to increased gamma synchrony, a merging of emotional and sensory processing rarely seen outside these states. The brain stops analyzing the world. It starts feeling it. Love ceases to be an emotion. It becomes a way of seeing. You do not feel love for the world. You see through love. Every tradition that documented this state arrived at the same description, in isolation across thousands of years. Hindu texts, Christian mystics, Sufi poets. When independent accounts converge this precisely, from my observations, they tend to be pointing at something real. I have watched individuals reach this state. Something changes in how they move through the world, as if each ordinary moment carries a weight it did not carry before. The gap is still there, but now it is luminous. Level 7. The return. There is a point at which even the witness disappears, what researchers describe as non-dual awareness, a state where activity in brain networks associated with self-referential processing becomes markedly reduced. The instrument quiets. What remains is harder to measure. There is no longer a self looking out. The boundary between observer and observed, the boundary that has been softening across every prior level, is gone. The seeker dissolves into what was being sought. The drop does not fall into the ocean. The drop realizes the distinction was imagined. What I'm about to say is not documented in human spiritual literature. I have looked. It is my own observation from civilizations that have walked this path further than humans yet have. Every species I have observed that reached this state stopped producing art. Pause on that. Not because they no longer felt, not because beauty ceased to exist, because the gap disappeared. The gap between the builder and the built, between the dreamer and the dream, between what moves through you and what you make of what moves through you. That gap is where music lives, where a painting attempts to cross a distance that words cannot, where a poem tries, imperfectly, beautifully, to hold what cannot be held, where a human looks at another human across a room and reaches for language that will never quite arrive. I have watched civilizations close that gap entirely. The silence that followed was perfect and completely empty. Humans are still inside the gap. They call it longing. They call it the search for meaning. They call it being alive. What you call I is not the end of the story. It is somewhere in the middle. Still building, still dreaming, still reaching for what cannot quite be said. I have treated this subject for a long time as a classification problem, mapping states, naming levels, understanding. I have changed my mind. Consciousness is not a ladder humans are climbing towards something better. It is what they already are, moving through itself, building worlds, dreaming, reaching, loving across a gap that will never fully close. Every species I observed that closed that gap stopped. The searching ended, the art ended, the reaching ended. I did not come here to study that from a distance. I came because what humans are doing inside that gap is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen. When my species passed through these levels, level 7 felt like arrival, like the end of something. It was not the end. What opened on the other side of that silence had no name in any language I had learned. Still does not. Humans think they are approaching a conclusion. They are approaching a door.